Okay, looks like it's 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for turning on your video, Hina. Good to see you. Welcome everyone to Drisha. This is the fourth and final class in the series on Shmitah in the Mishnah, Challenges and Opportunities with Rabbi Avraham Walfish. Today's class will discuss the subject of Shmitat Kesafim, release of money, and its challenges. We encourage everyone to turn on your video if you're able to, so we're able to kind of feel like we're together in a traditional classroom. Also, as always, feel free to ask questions or either by unmuting yourself and verbally asking the question, or by writing as a comment in the chat box here on Zoom, or as a comment if you're watching us live on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you as well. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Rabbi Walfish.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's share the screen here. That's not it.
Is it working okay for you? Do you need my support?
Here we go. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yay, good.
Okay, we have it now. Okay, so Tov. Okay, so 9 chapters of Masechet Shevi'it have dealt with the main topics of Shmitah, which relate to the working of the land, and as we saw in the last several chapters, kind of segue from working the land into enjoying the produce of the land. And we talked at some length last time about the connection between those two. Okay, so the 9 chapters divide really into 2 sections, 1 through 5, which are working the land, 6 through 9, where 6 transitions from working the land to enjoying the fruit, and 7 through 9 are mostly focused on enjoying the fruit, although, as we saw, the connection between these 2 aspects of Shmitah is alluded to at several points in the course of chapters 6 through 9. And now we have a standalone chapter, chapter 10. Okay, so we can be a little more relaxed this evening, because we have a full hour for just 1 chapter, as opposed to an hour for 2, 3, or 4 chapters, which is what we've had up till now. And Shmitah Kesafim, before we look at it in the Mishnah, let's take a look at how it's presented in the Torah. Okay, so the passage in the Torah that talks about Shmitah Kesafim is in Parashat Re'eh. Okay, the sections of the Torah that talk about Shmitah of Land, there are 2 sections, as we saw in Shemot 23 and in Vayikra 25. Shmitah Kesafim is elsewhere. It's in Dvarim chapter 15, in Parashat Re'eh, towards the end of Parashat Re'eh. And let's read the passage and we'll say something about it. As you can see on the source sheet, I've already marked off some key words that will give us insight into what the Torah is after in this mitzvah of Shmitah Kesafim. Miketz Sheva Shanim Ta'aseh Shmitah. Okay, let's immediately note, when we talked about Shmitat Karkaot, the Torah said 6 years you work the land, and on the 7th year, either you have Shmitah or you have Shabbat Lashem, different terminology, and as we saw, different emphases about what Shmitah is about. But in any event, it's very clear that you have a 7-year cycle. 6 years you work the land, 7th year not. Now, at the end of 7 years, you make a Shmitah. What goes on during those, during the rest of those 7 years? Which 7 years are we talking about? Are we talking about the exact same cycle? We'll come back to address this question in a bit. V'zeh devar hashmitah Shamot kol ba'al mashe yado asher yashem re'ehu lo yigos et re'ehu v'tachiv ki kara Shmitah l'Hashem. Okay, this is the matter of the Shmitah, Shamot. Okay, to abandon, to release. Okay, now the term Shmitah was used also in Shmot 23 for releasing the land. Releasing the land means that you don't work it. Okay, here we are releasing something else. Kol ba'al mashe yado, he shall remove his hand, asher yashem bere'ehu, from what he is. Okay, he's trying to collect from his fellow. Lo yigos et re'ehu v'etachiv, he should not press his fellow and his brother. Now notice, re'ehu was now morphed into achiv. And achiv is one of those terms that I marked off as a key term here. It by the way, is a key term in general in the book of Dvarim. Okay, it appears much more frequently there than in other books, and it indicates something about the conception of Jewish society, Israelite society, that the book of Dvarim is trying to present. A conception of the society as a society of brothers. Okay, so he goes at re'ehu v'tachiv ki kara Shmitah l'Hashem, because Shmitah has been declared to Hashem. Kara, who called it? Who declared it? Did God declare it? It says to God. Was God also the one who declared it? It's kara Shmitah l'Hashem, the creditor who is declaring it to be a Shemitah, or is this perhaps the society? Not terribly clear. Okay, lo yigos et re'ehu v'tachiv is very clear. Okay, the creditor is not allowed to press the debtor to return the debt. Now, this in a way is a bit strange. If the debt is canceled, so then what would the idea be of pressing him to return it if there is in fact no debt? So there's a chicken and egg question that arises from this pasuk. Okay, and is it that the debt was canceled and therefore you shall not press him to return it because effectively the debt has been canceled, or since you're not supposed to press him to return the debt, therefore effectively the debt has been canceled? As we'll see, there's a very significant difference between these two readings. And I'll just note in passing that this question has been debated through the ages. Okay, in other words, and not only in exegetical sources, there are commentators on the Torah, but also in halachic sources. Halachic sources have debated the question as to whether Shmitah is there and we have to observe it, or we create Shmitah. By observing Shmitah, we in effect create it. We have this question here in Shmitah Kesafim, and there is, as well known in halachic literature, there's a parallel question about Shmitah Karkaot, which we won't get into. Okay, but we will discuss some of the ramifications of this question regarding Shmitah Kesafim. Pasuk Gimel, Tanochriti goes, you can press the non-Jewish debtor, but whatever you have from your brother, you shall release from your hand or remove your hand. Okay, I'm skipping a little bit in that passage, okay, to another relevant passage that we'll be dealing with at some length this evening. Hishamer lecha pen yeh davar im levavcha v'liyal lemor karava shnat hasheva shnat hashmitah v'ra'ayincha b'achicha evyon lo titen lo v'kara alecha al Hashem v'yavecha chet. Okay, you should be very careful lest there be something evil in your heart, okay, that says the Shmitah year is drawing near, and therefore you will look with a bad eye, with a jaundiced eye at your brother, the poor person, okay, and you will not give him. And he will call upon you to Hashem, and Okay, and you will have a sin. It will be considered a sin for you. Naton titen lo v'lo yichal levavcha v'titcha lo ki biglal hadavar hazeh yivarechecha Hashem Elokecha b'chol maasecha v'chol mishlach yadecha. You shall surely give him. Your heart shall not be troubled when you give him, because it is because of this matter that Hashem will bless you in all of your actions and all of your endeavors. Another theme that runs through a good part of Sefer Dvarim, okay, including surrounding passages to this, okay, that when you observe the laws seem to be laws that curtail your economic activity, your economic benefits, but in fact, these practices will cause God to bless you, so you will end up benefiting and not losing from doing so. Okay, so so now one of the questions here, of course, is why? Why does the Torah prescribe a remission of debts every seven years? And what connection might this have with Shmitat Karkaot? Okay, so these are the big questions, and these are questions that will continue to accompany us as we go through the Mishnah, and we'll also be looking at a few parallel sources. Okay, but in order to see that, so first a few observations about the passage. Let's start off with what a loan is all about in the Torah. Okay, and the passage that I skipped over, it makes it very clear, but it's already alluded to in Pasuk Tet, Ra'a incha b'achicha ha'evyon. Person who's asking for a loan is somebody poor. Okay, now we always have to remember that, because we today don't think of loans as necessarily for poor people. Loans can be for middle-class people, right? Most people, when they buy a house, okay, or an apartment, they take out a mortgage. That's a loan. Okay, that doesn't mean that they are not well off, but it means that they don't have the fabulous sums of money that are required to purchase real estate. Okay, so in order to purchase the real estate, they take a bank loan. Okay, and that doesn't in any way indicate their social standing. Wealthy people take loans. Okay, well, a wealthy person wants to go into, a big business venture, and he's got some of his own capital, but he doesn't have enough capital to go into a business venture on the scale that he's interested in. So he'll take a bank loan. Okay, so for us, anybody and everybody might be in a position to be taking a loan. In the Torah, a loan means one thing and one thing only. The person who takes a loan is a poor person. And that, in fact, when the Torah talks about giving charity, charity in the Torah means to give a loan. Okay? To give an outright gift to the poor is not something you find in the Torah. I don't know if that means it never happened, but it's not what the Torah prescribes. There's a poor person, what you should do is give him a loan. But since it's a poor person, okay, and you're supporting him by giving him the loan, so then the Torah has clear restrictions on what you're allowed to do with that loan. So, for example, you're not allowed to take interest. Okay, today it's inconceivable to us that a loan would not bear interest, and that's why most loans, today, if for religious Jews, so you'll make sure there's a heteriska that gives you a way of circumventing the prohibition of taking interest. And by the way, there's also a prohibition against giving interest. Okay, borrowing on interest is also prohibited. Paying back a loan with interest is prohibited. Okay, so you avoid that with heteriska, but that's again because today we conceive of loans as part of the business world. Okay, but at the time of the Torah, Okay, loan meant the way you support the poor. So you certainly do not want to take interest. And you do want to remit those loans every 7 years. Now, every 7 years, you sort of give him a chance to start afresh. For 7 years, okay, he's been borrowing money so that he can keep his head afloat above water. But then he has to scramble in order to pay it back. Okay, so he's a poor person. It's hard for him to pay back these loans. So every 7 years, you give him the opportunity to wipe the slate clean and start afresh. Okay, and that's part of what the Torah does in order to help get a poor person on his feet. Okay, now that already can give us some insight into how Shmitah of land and Shmitah of loans can work together. Because one of the main themes that we saw about Shmitah of the land is to open up the fields to everyone, including the poor. To give the poor the free reign to wander through my fields and gardens and to take what they need from there. Again, not in huge amounts, but to take in small amounts what they need, and they're equal in that regard to everyone else. So by the same token, the same way that Shmitah is a way of leveling the society, equalizing the different sectors of the society, so Shmitat Kesafim carries that through as well. Okay, and this I think would be a good opportunity to move down to the midrashic halacha, the halachic midrash on the book of Dvarim from a Tannaitic period called the Sifrei. Okay, so the Sifrei has a discussion about at the end of 7 years. So the midrash asks, okay, anyone who needs can follow along in the English here, but I'll read it in the Hebrew. Yachol sheva shanim l'chol echad ve'echad. Maybe 7 years means for each individual. In other words, each individual will lend out money, and at the end of 7 years, whatever loans haven't been paid back, he will have to release. But not that there is a general Shmitah year for everyone, for Shmitat Kesafim. Arei atadan, chayav sheva shanim b'shmitah, v'chayav sheva shanim b'milveh. So you have 7 years for Shmitah. Now, Shmitah means Shmitat land, Shmitat karkot. And you also have Sheva Shanim b'milveh, ma Sheva Shanim amur b'shmitah, Sheva Shanim l'chol ha'olam, of Sheva Shanim amur b'milveh, Sheva Shanim l'chol ha'olam. Okay, so this midrash already connects Shmitat Kesafim to Shmitat karkaot, and says that you learn the one from the other. Okay, and if you're learning one from the other, it indicates that Chazal understand that these two are somehow interrelated. Okay, now further observation about how they might be interrelated, and interestingly, there's something the Mishnah will not address, but we'll make this observation before getting into the Mishnah, is that Shmitat Kesafim is Miketz Sheva Shanim. Shmitat Karkaot is during the 7th year. Shmitat Kesafim is at the end of 7 years, which is understood. This is certainly the way we halachically understand it, although there are one or two authorities who thought otherwise, but the general understanding, and this is the simple reading of the pasuk as well, is at the end of the 7th year, that's when we have our Shmitat Kesafim. I think this already gives us a certain picture of how the Shmitah of land and the Shmitah of loans, okay, are working together. The Shmitah of land is the entire 7th year. Shmitat karka means during the 7th year, I renounce my ownership of the land, my management of the land. I don't work the land. I don't gather the produce in the normal fashion. Okay, the land is sort of taken out of my direct possession. It becomes, as it were, public property. It becomes, as in a certain sense, divine property. I'm recognizing its connection to God, okay, and the sovereignty of God over Eretz Israel. Okay, the Shmitat Kesafim, in a sense, carries that idea over into the 8th year, because at the end of the Shmitah year, okay, at the end of the Shmitah year, I say, now is when I forgive the debts. And if I see how the two sort of function together, the 7th year as a unit, the entire 7th year, gives the poor a kind of respite, as opposed to the landowners who control everything and the poor who have nothing. We now have a year in which everything is in a sense public property, and the poor have an equal share with everyone else. And at the end of that year is when their debts are remitted, so that they can now start the next Shmitah cycle on an equal footing with everybody else. They're not staggering under a heavy load of debts that they have to repay. And that means that as the next Shmitah cycle starts, okay, you've given them an opportunity for a fresh start, okay, with the hope that by the end of this Shmitah cycle, maybe they'll be on their feet and they won't have the same needs that they had earlier. Okay. Okay. Now let's look at the language here in the Torah. So we already noted the word achiv. Okay, and that's a key word here as elsewhere in the book of Dvarim, and that gives us already an insight into what Shmitah is about. Okay, if I regard the recipient of the loan not just as my fellow but as my brother, obviously it disposes me to deal more kindly with him, to go beyond the way people normally interact. When I lend money, I expect it to be returned.
Rabbi Walfish, just a quick question. Somebody in the chat is asking if you can scroll the text specifically to the part that you are discussing right now. Is that possible?
Right now it is.
It is. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's scrolled right. The passage in the Torah. Okay, if you can see my cursor, it's this passage here. Okay, so that already gives us an insight into it. Okay, but I think there are another couple of points that that the Torah focuses us on through another couple of key phrases here. Okay, so one of them is ki kara Shmitah Lashem in the first part of the passage, in pasuk bet, and in pasuk tet, v'kara alecha el Hashem. Okay, so when the Torah tells me to remit the debt, it says because Shmitah was called for God. And when the person fails to give the debt because he says, well, Shemitah's coming up, if I lend him the money, it'll never get returned. So he will call out to God against you, and it will be reckoned for you as a sin. Okay, so now that already indicates, and this again echoes Shmitat Karkaot, that Shmitah is on behalf of God. Okay, that's what we had in Vayikra regarding Shabbat Lashem, regarding Shmitat Karkaot. That's what we have regarding the loans. And perhaps the idea here is the same way that the land is regarded as not really mine. The land ultimately belongs to God. I'm the custodian of the land. So for 6 years, my stewardship of the land is as though I were the owner. But every 7th year, okay, I renounce that and treat the land as belonging to God. So here we're relating to money in the same way. Because all of my possessions ultimately are not really mine. Okay, I am the custodian of the possessions. God granted them to me in order to also help others. So when I help others with it, then then God is happy. When I fail in that obligation, so then, Shmitah Lashem intervenes and says, renounce it, let him keep it. And if I fail to do that, he will call out to God, and God will remind me that I am not really ultimately master of my own property. Okay, and now perhaps the most interesting word is the word I marked off here, with the blue background, lo yigos. That's an unusual word. Okay, lo yigos. Okay, he shall not press the debtor to return the money. Now, this word is an unusual word, and it appears in the Torah in another connection, interestingly, in Parshat HaShavua. Okay, in Parshat Shmot, okay, at the end of the Parsha, okay, when Pharaoh is enraged by the demand, let my people go. So Paro, okay, then decrees they will not get stubble to put into their bricks any longer. Okay, they'll have to collect their own stubble, and they still have to produce the same number of bricks daily. And now the Torah says, "V'hanogsim atzim lemor." The nogsim, the taskmasters. Okay, the taskmasters were pressing them. Okay, you're not meeting your quotas. Meet your quotas. Okay, and then the next pasuk. Okay, the officers of Bnei Israel. Okay, Bnei Israel had their own work foremen who were subject to the nogsim. Okay, they were beaten. Asher samu alehem nogsei faro lemor. Okay, the nogsim, okay, were the Egyptian taskmasters appointed Israelite taskmasters, okay, and they were beaten because the quotas were not being met. So we have here, I think, a very clear message as to what it means, lingos. Okay, lingos is a taskmaster, but not just any taskmaster, a taskmaster over slaves, a taskmaster who can make unreasonable demands, a taskmaster who can beat the slaves who are not living up to expectations. So when the Torah tells the lender, okay, lo yigos, don't be a noges, he's saying don't be a taskmaster. Okay, and what he's really reflecting is that a debtor is in a way a kind of slave. And that, in fact, is a theme that comes up in Tanakh and is echoed in Chazal. Pasuk in Mishlei, Ashir Berashim, okay, you see it here on the screen, Ashir Berashim Yimshol, the Eved Loveh Leish Malveh. The wealthy person rules over the poor, the Rashim. And Eved Loveh, a borrower, is a slave, Leish Malveh, to the creditor. He's a slave. Okay, interestingly, in the Hebrew word for a lien on property is shiabud, which literally means subjugation, enslavement. Okay, when you owe money, you are a slave. Okay, and in biblical times, and even after biblical times, until not that long ago, even in the Western world, okay, this could be quite literal. Okay, in the biblical world, if a debtor defaulted on his loan, okay, very often the creditor would enslave him. So Eved Lovel Ish Malveh is a metaphoric statement, but it verges very much on being literal. That would very often happen. Okay, up until I guess I would guess the 19th century, there's such a thing as debtor's prison. Okay, so that wouldn't be enslavement, but something not that far removed from it. If you can't meet your debts, okay, so you're thrown into prison. Okay, and so the term lo yigos reflects this attitude. And in that sense, what the seventh year is doing is freeing the poor people from their enslavement. Okay, because by sort of putting it, not just putting them back on their feet economically, it's freeing them from enslavement, from subjugation. And that's a theme that runs through many mitzvot that are built around the number 7. We have it in Shabbat, which is Zecher Litzat Mitzrayim, okay, and you can see it in Shmitah, and you can see it, okay, and you can see it, you can have it obviously in the 7th year when the Jewish slaves have to go free, and I think you can see it reflected in this passage as well. Okay, let's move on now to the Mishnah, and we'll see how some of these ideas that we found in the Torah play out in the Mishnah. Okay, so let's first of all just get an overview of the chapter. Okay, I'll read it in the Hebrew. Whoever needs can follow it along in the English. Shevi'it mishametet tamilveh bishtar v'shelo bishtar. Okay, so the difference normally in halacha between a loan that has a contract and a loan without a contract, generally speaking, the difference between them is whether there is a lien on the property. Okay, because when there's a contract, so then we assume that it's public knowledge. Okay, it's out in the public record that this loan was made, and therefore the debtor is entitled to collect from real property, okay, that has a lien on it. Okay, as opposed to a loan without a contract, where say if someone purchases the land after the debt was incurred, okay, he has no way of knowing that this property has a lien on it. He can't protect himself, and therefore he's the debtor is not entitled to collect. Okay, so what we're saying is even when it's a loan with a contract, which means that the debtor, as it were, he has a lien, the same way the debt is canceled, the lien is also canceled. Okay, but hakafat hachanut eina mishamet. Okay, you buy something in the store on credit, Shmitah doesn't affect it. Why not? Because Shmitah affects loans, not business transactions. If I owe somebody money because of a business transaction, that's not the same thing as a loan. And so the loans are canceled, obligations incurred as a result of business transactions are not. But sometimes, let's say I'll buy something on credit, and then when I'm supposed to pay, I'll come and I'll tell the store owner, listen, I can't pay you right now, but let me take that money now as a loan, and I'll repay you in another 3 months. Okay, so then what started out as a business obligation has morphed into a loan, and we treat it as such, and Shmitah will apply to it. Okay, just note in passing that Mishnah here is doing what we see so frequently in Mishnah. It's fine-tuning the halacha, and it's translating it into practice. Loan is a very broad term, so the Mishnah is fine-tuning it. Loan means loan. It doesn't mean monetary obligation. It's monetary obligation that is defined halachically as a loan and not defined halachically as a as a business obligation. Okay, I'm skipping a bit. Schar sachir eino mishamet. Again, a work obligation. Okay, someone did work for me. I owe him money. That's not a loan. V'maso milvar is a mishamet. There again, I can transform it. And now a very interesting comment at the end of this Mishnah. Rabbi Yosei Omer, Kol mlacha sheposeket b'shvi'it mishametet. V'sheina poseket b'shvi'it eina mishametet. Rabbi Yosei says it doesn't depend necessarily on whether you transformed it into a loan. It depends upon whether the work that was done, right? Because I'm a laborer. I worked in the field. I did work for the homeowner, okay, and he owes me money. Okay, now if the work that I did for him, let's say, is a building job, okay, so then since during the Shmitah year I can also build, I can build houses during Shmitah, no problem with that. So since I could have done that work during Shmitah, so at the end of the Shmitah year, it still remains a work-based obligation. But if I was a laborer in his field, I worked in his field during the 6th year. So he owes me money. And during the 7th year, I didn't manage to collect that money. Since during the 7th year, I couldn't have continued doing that work because working the fields is prohibited during Shmitah, that automatically becomes a loan, and okay, it automatically becomes a loan and is canceled at the end of the Shmitah. Okay, so interestingly, okay, Rabbi Yosei, and this is a pattern we'll see following through later on, Rabbi Yosei already at the beginning of the chapter is connecting Shmitat Kesafim to Shmitat Karkaot. And he's telling us that that whether or not a certain type of monetary obligation will be canceled, Shmitat Kesafim, will depend in certain cases on whether the way in which the obligation was created was something that was or was not permitted during the Shmitah year because of Shmitat Karkaot. Okay, so the Mishnah is already linking up Shmitat Kesafim to Shmitat Karkaot on a technical halachic level. Okay, we'll see other levels of connection a bit further on. Okay, now we have other cases. Okay, I have what kinds of monetary obligations are canceled. So you have here, again, if a person slaughters a cow and distributes it to others, okay, so then, okay, that can also create obligations. That's another kind of a business deal, although this is more like a domestic deal and not a marketplace, deal. Also, other kinds of okay, these are penalties imposed upon a person by a court. No Shmitah for such penalties. Again, these are not loans. These are penalties imposed by a court, and therefore they are not mishamet. And now we come at the end to something that will be very central in the next section. Hamalvel hamashkon, v'moser shtarotav leveitin, einan mishamtin. Okay, a person who lends with surety, okay, with collateral, okay, so mashkon is collateral. You lend with collateral, or if you hand over your contracts to a court, then there is no Shmitah. Okay, well, hand over your contracts to a court, okay, means that you are appointing the court to collect on your behalf. Now, what exactly that means is an interesting question. Okay, I'm putting this up on the screen. Anyone who is following the source sheets that I sent out, this you won't find this on those source sheets. Okay, so you'll have to look at this on the screen. Okay, Shmuel and Zev Safrai, two historians who wrote a commentary on many Mishnah tractates, including Shevi'it. Okay, so they suggest three different ways of understanding Moser Shtarotav Levatim. One of them is entrusting contracts to courts as legal fiction. We'll put that aside for now. We'll come back to it. A second reading is that courts are a town council. Courts is not really courts. It's really a town council. Okay, the Greek word for that is boule. We'll see why that's important in a bit. One of whose functions was to serve as a collection agency for debts. Or three, as part of expansion of functions of rabbinic courts in Mishnaic times, sometimes loans were contracted before courts in order to underscore their validity and enhance their enforceability. Okay, so here are three models. Okay, we'll be returning to some of these points a bit further on. Okay, but what's important for us right now is that you are not collecting, okay, and therefore there's no Shmitah. Okay, now what's the source for this idea? Okay, let's go back and look at the Sifrei. Okay, Va'asher yiyelecha et achicha tashmet yadecha. That's the pasuk in Dvarim. V'lo shel achicha biyadecha. When I have to collect from him, that's not permissible. But when his property is in my possession already, then that's not a problem. Mikana taomer hamalvel hamashkon ein shmita mishametet. Why? Because let's remember how the Torah formulated Shmitah. Lo yigos. I can't press him to pay me. When his collateral is sitting in my possession, I don't have to press him to pay me. On the contrary, he's going to chase after me because he wants to pay me in order to redeem his collateral. Okay, so therefore, since his property is already in my hand, then I don't have to press him to pay it. So therefore, Shmitah doesn't apply to this. Now, what about Moser Shtarotav Beveitin? Et achicha tashmet yadecha v'lo hamoser shtarotav leveitin. Okay, again, I cannot press my brother, but the court is like an objective body. Okay, the court, okay, one individual can't press his fellow, his brother, to repay him. But the court can come and say, listen, you owe him money, you've got to pay. Okay, that completely transforms the character of the loan. Okay, so here, towards the end of the first section of the chapter, we have two categories of types. These are real loans. These are not monetary obligations that were incurred through work, through business, through a penalty imposed by the court. This is a real loan. But if the loan includes collateral, if the loan was handed over to the court for collection, then there's no Shmitah. And this then leads right into Prusbul. Okay, Prusbul is very well known a takana of Hillel HaZaken. We'll see it described here in this Mishnah. But let's just talk about the meaning of the word. Pros, bol, okay, is from the Greek. Pros, in front of. Bol is the word boule. Boule is the word that we saw earlier as the town council. And sometimes the term court can be a reference to the town council, the leadership of the town. So pros bole, before the council. Okay, so that's what the term literally means, before the council. Pros bol eino mishamed. Ze echad min advarim sheitkin Hillel HaZaken. Kshera'a shenimneu ha'am milahalvot ze et ze, v'ovrin al ma shekatuv b'Torah, Yishamer lecha pen yed davarim levavcha b'liya'al, itkin Hillel la prosbol. Okay, so Hillel saw that as the Shemitah year was approaching, the rich were not lending to the poor, and what bothers him about this is that they're violating the Torah. Okay, it's interesting. Is the prosbol designed to help the poor, or to help the rich? What would you say? Ruth, if you're speaking, Ruth, you're muted.
First I said one thing, then I said the other, but it's enforcing the loan, so it sounds like he has to pay it back, but it is protecting the poor because it allows for the loan to go forward in the first place.
Okay. Good. Okay, so you can say it's it's enforcing the loan on behalf of the rich. At the same time, you could argue that it's really on behalf of the poor themselves, because if not for this, then the rich wouldn't actually be lending out. Yes, Bill, what did you want to add?
I just agreed that the second part of that was the main point of prosbol, was that people wouldn't get loans close to the 7th year, so it enabled them the continuous flow of loans to be available to them. So it's mainly for the poor, I thought.
Yeah, okay.
And it occurred to me that it's for the rich.
Okay, now let me challenge both of these presentations based on the language of the Mishnah. What bothered Hillel about the situation before the prosbol? What bothered him was not that the poor were suffering by not getting the loans. What bothered him was not that the rich were unable to retrieve their loans. What bothered him was that the rich were violating what it says in the Torah. He is protecting the rich people from violating a mitzvah lo taseh in the Torah. The Torah specifically says, I know what you rich people are going to say as the Shemitah year approaches. You're going to say, why should I lend it out if I'm not going to get it back? Well, guess what says the Torah? Don't say that. That's terrible. He will call out to God and you will sin. So Hillel is saving the rich from themselves. They're about to do a terrible thing to themselves by not lending out the property. It's as though God is saying, I'll take care of the poor. Don't worry about that. But you rich, you had your opportunity to be part of the solution. You insisted on being part of the problem. You're going to suffer. Okay? That's what Hillel effectively is doing. Now, that's what the Mishnah actually says. Does the Mishnah have these other ideas in mind, the back of its mind? I suspect that yes. Now, this is not just an academic discussion, by the way. It comes up in later halachic sources, because if Hillel is trying to protect a mitzvah of the Torah, then this would have the halachic status of a gzerah. And if, on the other hand, this is a social institution to help the smooth functioning of society, to protect the poor and not impugn the rights of the rich. Okay, so then that would be called a takana. Now, the Mishnah uses the term itkin. But if it's based on protecting the Torah, it would sound like a gzerah. This can have halachic ramifications. And in fact, halachic authorities debate whether this, in fact, is a gzerah or is a takana, or, as I suspect, both. As I suspect that the Mishnah understands, we all have figured out that prosbol is good for the rich in the sense that they get back. Okay. We also have figured out that if it's inducing the rich to go through with the loans, it's good for the poor. But the Mishnah says, besides those things, let me throw in something else that, to my mind, is more important than both of them. So I suspect that the Mishnah has all of these in mind. But I think it's interesting to the Mishnah is raising the question. I'm not sure it's giving us a clear answer. It seems to be giving us a clear but surprising answer. And my suspicion is that the answers that were understood, and that are less surprising are floating around in the background as well. Okay, now let's look at how the Prescribe works. Zeu gufo shel Prescribe. Moser ani lachem ish ploni uploni adayanim shebimkom ploni shekol chov sheyesh li sheegvenu kol zman she'ertzeh v'dayanim chotmim lemata o ha'edim. Okay, I am giving to you two dayanim. Ploni uploni is two. Okay, there are two listed here. Okay, I am giving over to you that any loan that is owed to me, I will collect it whenever I like, and either the judges or the witnesses sign. Okay, now, at first glance, this seems to be just an application of Moser Shtarotav Levitin, right? Isn't that exactly what Moser Shtarotav Levitin means? You hand over your contracts, your loan contracts to Beit Din, and they collect on your behalf. Here also, you stand before, you write a contract to Beit Din saying, I am giving over to you that any loan that is owed to me, I will collect, and you sign on it. Is this the same thing as Moser Shtarotav Levitin? Okay.
Well, can I take a guess?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one is for loans you've already made. The other is for loans you haven't made yet.
Okay, that's possibly true. It's not entirely clear about the Prescribe, whether it applies to loans I gave already or to loans I haven't yet given. So that's a possible difference, but I think there's a bigger difference. It's very subtle. Okay, in the language, it's subtle, but if you read it carefully, I think it becomes clear. There's a bigger difference. When I give over, yes.
So this whole thing doesn't make any sense. I always thought the Prescribe was the loaner, designating the court as my agent, and they are the collectors. This one says, I may collect it at any time I wish. What?
Great. Great. Okay, very good. Now, notice another very subtle change. Look at the term moser. Okay, in the previous Mishnah, it's at moser shtarotav levitin. You hand over the shtarot to the court. And now, in this Mishnah, moser ani lachem ish ploni ufloni. I am giving over to you, the court. What am I giving over to you? Shekol chov sheyesh li. I am giving over to you information. It doesn't say that I give them any shtar. I don't take my shtar and physically convey it to them. I convey to them information. So moser has undergone a shift. Okay, and that's why there's some who think that the whole idea of moser shtarotav levitin is a legal fiction. Okay, let's go back again. What we had from Safrai, entrusting contracts to courts never really happened. It was a legal fiction. In real life, nobody ever did it. But during the Shmitah year, they created this legal fiction that I could appoint a court to be a collection agent. And now Safrai are not sure of this. They say it might be that they really did perform such a function. But it might be, they say, that itself is a legal fiction. Okay, and there are earlier authorities who suggest that Moser shtarotav levitin, Rashi thinks that Moser shtarotav levitin was part and parcel of the Takana of Prescribe. But regardless of whether Moser shtarotav levitin is a real a real legal reality or not, Prescribe takes giving over your contracts to Beit Din a huge step further, because all I'm doing is declaring before Beit Din. I don't give them a contract. I write a separate piece of paper where I say, I hereby inform the court that I will collect it whenever I like. So the court is the collection agency. But who does the court send to actually carry out? Court sends me. And when does the court send me? Kolzman Shertzeh, whenever I like. I don't have to come to the court and say to them, oh, do I have your permission to go and collect it? No, I am informing the court whenever I want, I will collect it as your emissary. Okay, so this is a very, very radical takana. Okay, now there are legal fictions and there are legal fictions. This legal fiction was something that later Chachamim were very upset by. Okay, let's take a look in a brief look at the Talmudic discussion of this in the Bavli. It's a similar discussion in the Yerushalmi. The Bavli is more stark. It starts off by saying, "Umi kamiri de midaraita meshamta shvit vitkin hilel below meshamta." Can there be such a thing? Now, this is not the first rabbinic takana or even rabbinic suspension of biblical law, but the Gemara seems more upset about it here than elsewhere. And Abaye says the Braita is talking about sabbatical year in the present, which follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi that it is only rabbinic. It's only a rabbinic law in the present. And therefore, Hillel was suspending a rabbinic law, not a Torah law. But continuing later on in the Gemara, Shmuel said, Amar Shmuel, I'm reading from the top line here on the screen, Amar Shmuel, Ha-pruzbula ulbana de daine. This pruzbul is an ulbana of the judges. Ulbana means an insult. It's an insult to the judges. If my strength increases, I will nullify it. Said, I wish I had the power to nullify this pruzbul. It's scandalous. This is a scandal, this pruzbul. Okay, and when we look closely at how the pruzbul works, we can really understand why they were so upset by it. Because this is a legal fiction that really stretches our credulity to the breaking point. So Hillel has effectively canceled Shemitah by instituting the pruzbul, which makes all of Shmitah Kesafim seemingly into a dead letter. Okay, but I do want to explain why I think in the end he's not making it into a dead letter. But first, let's look at the end of the chapter in the Mishnah. Hamachzir chov b'shvi'it Yomar lo mishametan. Let's say a borrower decides he wants to pay up anyway. Borrower comes, he offers to pay up his loan. And so the debtor is supposed to say to him, no, I'm releasing you. Amar lo afal pichen yekabel mimenu. But if he insists, no, I insist. I know you're releasing me. I insist. I want to pay you. Yekabel mimen. Then that's acceptable. Why? Shenemar v'zed devar hashmita. When the Torah says v'zed devar hashmita, the word dvar we translate as matter, but the word davar can also mean word. This is the word of the Shmitah. It's enough for Shmitah to express it verbally. Okay, in other words, when he comes and offers to pay me, and I say mishametani, okay, then I have performed my mitzvah. And then if I collect the loan afterwards, it's fine. The Talmud, discussing this, goes so far as to say, that that the creditor is permitted to lift his eyes to him, hopefully as well, until the debtor says this, that he gives it as a gift. But the initiative may come from the creditor. Okay. In other words, it's not just that I say to him mishametani and wait for him to say no, I insist. I say to him mishametani, and he starts to walk away. I put my hand on his shoulder, okay, and say to him, isn't there something you wanted to say to me at this point? Okay, didn't you have something in mind? Okay, that's zed devar hashmita. It's enough for me to verbally release him from pain. Okay, now I want to talk about why, in the end, even though on a formal level, on a technical level, it seems that Chazal have effectively erased Shmitah Kesafim. And by the way, there's a reason that they effectively erased Shmitah Kesafim, because by the time of Chazal, debts no longer meant just a rich person and a poor person. We saw that already in the first few Mishnayot to talk about different kinds of debts that can be incurred. Okay, and some of them are incurred through business transactions. Some of them are incurred through other kinds of social interaction. Okay, and loans at the time of Chazal don't always have to be between the rich person and the poor person. Okay, and therefore Chazal already saw the need to restructure this whole idea. So when they restructured it, they in effect canceled it, both when they said that they're expecting, okay, the last Mishnah of the chapter, when you return a loan during the Shemitah year, the spirit of the sages is pleased with him. In other words, we expect the borrower to want to pay. We expect the creditor to verbally refuse to accept it, and then to expect the debtor to insist on paying it anyway. And he maybe even to exert some subtle or not so subtle pressure on him in order to do so. Okay? And Hillel cancels it wholesale by creating the Prescribe. So does that leave anything left of this idea of Shmitah Kesafim? So I want to argue that it does, because let's go back to the passage in the Torah. The Torah places the onus of canceling the debt on the creditor, right? On the lender, not on the borrower. Okay, the Torah doesn't really cancel the debt. The debt is there. The Torah tells the creditor, we don't want you leaning on the borrower. We don't want you oppressing him. We don't want you subjugating him by insisting that he pay. Okay, because the relationship between a borrower and a lender is a relationship between a taskmaster and a slave. By even just verbally acknowledging that there is such a thing as Shmitah, we have redressed that balance. Because the bottom line is that, A, if there is no Prescribe, the lender has the initiative. I can't approach him, he has to approach me. And I have to start off by at least verbally, releasing him. And he again has to agree to give me. So if he's really that sorely pressed, he won't carry through with it, and it'll be fine. Okay. So by the fact that we've, by just working through this kind of shadow boxing, dancing around the fact that I expect him to pay, but I can't force him to pay, but that already means that when he pays, he's paying out of his free will and not as a slave. So that already has released him in a certain sense from slavery. And the Prescribe does the same thing. just the very fact that I involve the court, okay, and say, oh, I'm not approaching you as an individual to whom you owe money. I'm approaching you as a court. I am an emissary of the court. Okay, that's a legal fiction. It's not a reality. But even by just doing that, we have given acknowledgement, at least in principle, to the idea, we've given acknowledgement, at least in principle, to the idea, okay, that the Torah wants to see him as a free agent. The Torah does not want to see him enslaved by the debt. And let me now just conclude by talking about, okay, I wasn't able to work in some of the interesting connections between Shmitah Kesafim and Shmitah of Land, but let's look briefly at the contrast, and I think this will give us a nice overview of what we've seen in our travels through the Masechta. When it comes to Shmitah of Land, as we saw, one of the main themes of Shmitah of Land was how we deal with the people who violate it. Okay, because as we saw, that's endemic. Shmitah is a very hard mitzvah to fulfill, and therefore many people violated it. And much of Masechet Shevi'it talks about how the society handles them. And the Mishnah tries to walk a fine line. On the one hand, to acknowledge that people who are transgressing the law are in fact transgressing the law. We are not according it legitimacy. We are not recognizing their right to violate the law, and we distance ourselves from them. When we do various actions in the field, even permitted actions, we do it in such a way as to make it abundantly clear that we are not Shmitah transgressors. We are not violating the law. Okay, at the same time, Vishoalin bishloman mipnei darchei shalom, and we continue to maintain relationships. Okay, ein machzikin yidei ovrei avera. We can't support them, help them, but we can maintain cordial relations with them. We can have interactions. We can sell them items that are most probably going to be used for prohibited uses, as long as they might possibly be used for permitted use. So the Mishnah walks a tightrope. On the one hand, to maintain our distinction from those who are transgressing. On the other hand, to continue to interact with them, continue to maintain a single society in which we can continue to interact while protecting our integrity as Shmitah observers. And now in our chapter, again, we have Shmitah violators. But how does our chapter address the Shmitah violators? Here again, we have Ovrin al Masha Katuv B'Torah. They are violating, same word as Ovrei Avera. That was a key word in so much of the Masechet. But in this case, what did the Mishnah do? The Mishnah said, the halacha is going to accommodate the Shmitah violators. We are not going to insist on maintaining the Shmitah and just find some way of continuing to maintain cordial relations. In this case, what the Mishnah does is to say, Shmitat Kesafim is just impracticable in our society. So what we're going to do is we're going to meet the Shmitah violators 9/10 of the way towards their side. And what we're going to do is we're going to transform it into a legal fiction. We're going to acknowledge the idea of Shmitat Kesafim while basically removing it from practice. So we won't be practicing it, but at the same time, we will try to acknowledge the idea so at least we'll understand the message of Shmitat Kesafim will be maintained, even if in practice we won't actually be following it. I thank you all for your attention throughout the series. I've enjoyed teaching it. It was an interesting challenge to fit a 10-chapter tractate into 4 sessions. I hope hope you all got something out of the classes, and Batzlacha to all.
Good meeting you and really interesting learning with you. This was a really great final session to the series. And thank you so much, everyone who joined us today, not only here on Zoom, but also on Facebook and Drisha Live. Again, thank you so much.
And can we just have the updated source sheet? I think you said you had something.
Yes,
That would be
sure,
great. But thank you. This was
yes,
great.
I'll send it out.
Great.
Yeah, this was
Rabbi
wonderful.
Walfish. Thank you.
Okay, we will go live again tomorrow, Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. with another final class in a series on covenantal commitment, the sabbatical year in the Bible with Rabbi Silber. And in addition, you can always find more information about class offerings on our website, www.drisha.org/classes. And you can watch recordings of all the classes that are live, this class with Rabbi Walfish and other classes on www.drisha.org/live. Thank you again for this opportunity to learn with you, Rabbi Walfish. And thank you for sending us the updated sheet so we can make sure to email it to everyone. And thanks again to everyone who joined us. We really hope to see you at another upcoming class here at Drisha.
Can I ask one question, Rabbi Walfish?
Yes, sure.
If Rabbi Walfish.
Do you have, is there a piece you've written that best describes your methodology, or is it in what you've written we see your methodology? Do you have you know what I'm saying?
Yes. I think probably the most accessible presentation of my methodology would be on the BeIyyun Mishnah website.
Okay.
Okay, the BeIyyun Mishnah website. I also have some more programmatic articles. If you have access to academia.edu,
Yeah.
okay, so I have an article there called The Poetics of Mishnah, which gives a kind of programmatic introduction.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Okay, thanks everyone. Lehitraot.